In the pale light of a Kentucky autumn morning, with mist clinging to the sidewalks and the wind tugging gently at the edges of old coats, Thomas Ray set up his small food cart near the weathered bus stop. He was 79, his back bowed by decades of toil, his hands rough like bark, and his movements slower now. But every gesture he made, pouring coffee, wrapping sandwiches, flipping open the faded awning of his cart, carried quiet dignity. His life was simple: a modest trailer on the town's edge, a battered thermos, a tin cash box, and the daily ritual of warmth he offered to strangers for a few dollars or less. That morning, as he wiped condensation from his cart's window, he saw them. 3 girls, walking in single file toward the local middle school, arms folded tight against the cold. Their clothes were thin, summer fabrics stretched across shivering limbs, and their faces were pale, not from the weather, but from something deeper. Hunger, maybe. Exhaustion. The kind of sadness children shouldn't have to wear. Thomas noticed how they avoided the sunlight, their eyes trained on the cracks in the sidewalk like the world above had nothing to offer them. They came every day. The eldest, Olivia, walked with a protective tension, always shielding the younger two, Mia, 12 and restless, and little Grace, just 9, barely keeping up. Their lunch bags swung like empty pouches, fraying at the seams, stitched by hand. Once, when the wind caught one just right, it fluttered open. There was nothing inside. Not a piece of bread, not a single fruit. Just air, and maybe a little hope. Thomas felt the ache grow sharper each time they passed. He didn't know their names yet, but he knew their silence. He recognized the slowness of their steps, the way their shoes bent oddly from overuse. He knew what it meant to go unseen. His own childhood had worn similar colors: hand-me-downs, quiet hunger, the longing for someone, anyone, to care. That morning, his bones ached more than usual and business had been slow. The street was nearly empty. He watched the girls pass again, thinner than ever, and something in him stirred. An old instinct, the kind that once made him give half his lunch to a stray dog or leave bread near the woods for foxes in winter. He reached for what little he had left: 3 sandwiches, wrapped in wax paper, cocoa, still warm in his old thermos, a folded napkin that smelled faintly of cinnamon and coffee. He stepped from behind his cart and called out, not too loud, not too fast. "Hey girls," his voice cracked gently. "You hungry?" The oldest one froze, holding her sisters close. Mia blinked at him cautiously. "We don't have any money," she muttered, barely audible. Thomas knelt slightly, mindful of his knees, and smiled. Not the kind of smile that expects anything back, but the one that simply says, "I see you. It's all right. I just want you to eat. That's all." They took the food slowly, still unsure if it was a trick. But when they sat on the old bench nearby, their hands shaking with the heat of the cocoa, something shifted. Grace smiled first, shy and small. Olivia glanced up for a moment, her eyes meeting Thomas's. It was the kind of look that didn't need words, just the faint glimmer of trust beginning to flicker. And in that moment, beneath the breath of a coming winter, a bond was born, not of charity, but of quiet, human connection. It would be the beginning of something neither they nor Thomas could yet imagine. From that chilly morning onward, Thomas Ray became more than a vendor behind a weathered food cart. He became a quiet sentinel, watching over 3 girls who had slipped through the cracks of a town too busy to notice. He never asked questions, never demanded stories or thanks. He simply showed up, rain or shine, with 1 extra sandwich, then 2, then 3. A thermos of cocoa grew into a paper bag of apples, eggs, and bread. His movements remained slow and deliberate, but behind every offering was an unspoken vow: "As long as I breathe, you will not go hungry." The girls began to walk straighter. Grace smiled more easily now, sometimes waving before she even reached the corner. Mia started talking, never much, but enough to let him know about a math quiz or a scraped knee. Olivia, always the guarded one, took longer. Her trust was harder to earn, her eyes always scanning the world for the next sharp edge. But even she began to nod at him in the mornings, and once, when her voice cracked from exhaustion, she whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Ray."
He didn't respond.
He just smiled and placed an extra orange in her hand. At night, alone in his trailer, Thomas counted coins. He clipped coupons, skipped dinners, and quietly turned down trips to the doctor. His knees had grown unreliable, and his back screamed each time he bent to lift a crate of supplies. But pain had never been a stranger to him, and he had learned long ago that some aches were worth bearing. What mattered was that 3 children, 3 shadows who had once blended into sidewalks, were beginning to look alive again. Eventually, the truth began to unfold in quiet fragments. Olivia spoke first, her voice flat with the weight of what she carried. Their stepmother, Linda, was cruel, cold, calculating, withholding food and sleep in exchange for chores, obedience, silence. Their father, weary from long shifts and absent in spirit, never saw the bruises beneath their sleeves or the fear tucked into their silences. Thomas didn't ask for more. He simply listened, jaw tight, heart breaking, the words lodging in his chest like splinters. No child should live like this, he thought. Not on my watch. He began slipping notes to teachers, groceries to trusted neighbors. He left shoes at the edge of school fences, jackets folded on benches. No one knew it was him. He never signed a thing. He didn't want praise, only for the girls to feel, if only for a moment, that someone out there gave a damn. That someone was watching the watchers. That the darkness in their home didn't define the world. The townspeople started noticing. Not the girls, not yet, but Thomas. Or rather, they noticed how something had changed. His cart was still there, but his eyes watched the schoolyard more than the sidewalk. He became quieter, slower, but somehow more present. He no longer belonged only to the corner of that bus stop. He belonged to those girls. Without fanfare, without titles, without applause, Thomas Ray became their guardian. Not in the way heroes are written in books, but in the way some trees shelter silently during a storm, unseen but immovable. And Linda noticed, too. Her gaze turned sharper each time she saw him. She sensed something slipping beyond her reach, something warm, protective, defiant. But Thomas didn't blink. He had lived too many years, buried too many friends, and survived too many storms to be afraid of someone like her. He wasn't reckless. He was careful, measured, but never afraid. When Grace once asked why he was always there, he only said, "Sometimes we don't get to choose the family we're born into, but we can choose the ones we fight for." He never used the word hero. But in the eyes of 3 little girls who once believed they were invisible, he became just that. A man with no cape, no ceremony, no spotlight. Only a coat that smelled like coffee and bread, a voice that never lied, and a heart that refused to turn away. He gave them food, yes, but more than that, he gave them a kind of safety they had never known. And though the world around them kept turning, Thomas Ray stood still, an anchor in the shifting tides of their childhood, a silent guardian whose greatest weapon was love, offered without condition and without end. It began with whispers. Not loud, not accusing, just murmurs passed between teachers in the staff room, neighbors at mailboxes, strangers at the grocery line who had, for the first time in years, looked closely enough to see what had been hiding in plain sight. Grace's arms looked thinner than they should. Olivia's eyes carried the kind of darkness that didn't belong to childhood. Mia had a limp that no one could explain. And somehow, without ever raising his voice, Thomas Ray had pulled back the veil. He never said Linda's name aloud. He never told anyone what he knew. But his actions became arrows, pointing toward truths the town had long chosen to ignore. Every extra sandwich, every coat left behind, every glance that lingered too long at the school gate, it all formed a quiet indictment against a culture of polite silence. And one day, that silence cracked. It happened on a Wednesday morning. Olivia showed up to school with a bruised wrist, her sweater pulled halfway over her hand. Thomas saw it, just as he had seen everything before, but this time, someone else saw it too. Mrs. Ellery, the new guidance counselor, caught the look on Thomas's face. It wasn't rage. It wasn't panic. It was the deep, wounded stillness of a man who had watched too many battles begin too late. That look changed her. Within 24 hours, Olivia was speaking in a small room with soft lighting. Grace was brought in. Mia followed, frightened but holding Olivia's hand. They didn't tell the whole truth, not yet, but they said enough. Enough for investigations to begin. Enough for Child Protective Services to knock on a door they had once ignored. Enough for Linda to realize that her reign of quiet cruelty was coming to an end. And through it all, Thomas said nothing. He stayed by his cart, still serving coffee, still nodding at passers-by as if nothing had changed. But something had. Words spread, slowly, respectfully, about the old man who had noticed what no one else dared to see. The same people who had once passed him without a second glance now paused. They brought extra food. Someone offered to fix the wheel on his cart. A high school boy started standing with him on cold mornings, not saying much, just being there. It was as if the town, long dormant in its apathy, had been stirred awake by the quiet force of one man's decency. When the caseworkers finally arrived at the girl's house, Thomas wasn't there. He had made it a point never to cross that line. But Grace looked for him anyway, scanning the street from the back seat of the social worker's car. He was standing at the end of the block, not moving, hands in his coat pockets. He didn't wave. He just nodded. Once, steady, like a lighthouse staying lit as the storm rolled past. In the days that followed, the town held its breath. People started asking questions, not just about the girls, but about themselves. Why hadn't they seen it? Why had they turned away? And what else had they been too busy, too distracted, too comfortable to notice? Thomas didn't answer those questions. He didn't speak at the school board meeting where new programs were proposed. He wasn't present when the mayor thanked the citizens who stepped up. But his absence spoke louder than any speech. People knew. The girls knew. And slowly, so did the town. They began to see more clearly. A boy with hand-me-down shoes now had a new pair before winter. A single mother found groceries on her porch. An elderly man with no family began receiving rides to the clinic. Little kindnesses bloomed in corners once left barren. The town didn't change overnight, but it had started. It had woken up. And Thomas? He kept showing up. Every morning. Coffee. Sandwiches. A book tucked into Mia's backpack. An extra scarf for Olivia. A smile for Grace. He never asked for anything in return. He had lived long enough to know that real change isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with banners or speeches. It starts in silence, with a man who chooses to care when no one else will. He had once been just a vendor. Now he was a reminder. A gentle, weathered reminder that the smallest acts of love could awaken even the sleepiest of towns, and that sometimes all it took to break the cycle of neglect was one pair of watchful eyes and a heart that refused to look away. The cafe was quiet that morning. Not silent. There was the low hum of conversation, the occasional clink of a coffee spoon against ceramic, but quiet in the way only a place filled with purpose can be. The walls were lined with warm brick and second-hand books. Framed photos of children, now adults, smiled from corners of the room. A battered coat rack stood by the door, and beside it, a brass plaque no one could miss. It read, Thomas Ray Children's Center. For the ones no one saw until he did. The woman behind the counter had silver beginning to thread her dark curls. She moved with calm assurance, speaking gently to the young man nervously holding a job application in his hands. Her name tag read Olivia Ray. She had changed, of course she had. The broken wrist, the guarded eyes, the cold mornings, those were buried beneath decades of healing. But if one looked closely, the steel was still there. The quiet strength. The sense that she had walked through fire once and made it out holding the hands of two little girls beside her. Grace had become a lawyer, family law, by design. She spent her days battling the very silence that had once swallowed her childhood, making sure other voices were heard. Mia had become a pediatrician. Her hands, once scraped and small, now healed others with patience and light. And Olivia had built this place. It started with a dream she scribbled in a journal at 16. A house that served hot meals and safe beds. A community where no child would ever be punished for being invisible. A center where kindness was policy, not charity. When she was 30, after years of saving and fighting bureaucracy with a fury born from memory, the first door opened. By 40, there were 4 branches. But this was the first. The heart. Each room bore signs of his touch, though Thomas Ray had long since passed. A coffee cart, rebuilt and polished, stood in the lobby as both decoration and memory. Every morning, a volunteer served cocoa and sandwiches by it. Always 3 extras. Always. No one had to explain why. There had been no grand funeral for Thomas. He'd gone quietly, as he'd lived, leaving behind a trailer with a faded photo of the 3 girls on the fridge and a journal of receipts marked for them. He had no family, no medals, no estate. But when the news of his passing reached Olivia, she fell to her knees in the middle of a grocery aisle, overcome by a grief that felt like losing her own heartbeat. The man who had once stood between her and the darkness had become the root from which her entire future grew. And now, 26 years later, that seed had blossomed. Outside the center, a girl no older than Grace once stood shivering by the gate. Olivia watched her from the window. Thin coat, nervous eyes, that same hunched posture, like she was trying to make herself smaller. Olivia didn't hesitate. She walked out, offered a sandwich, peanut butter and jelly, just like Thomas used to make. The girl stared at her, then reached for it with trembling fingers. Olivia smiled. "You don't have to talk," she said softly. "Just come inside. It's warm, and you're not alone anymore." The girl followed. Inside, the lights were soft. The walls breathed stories. A group of teenagers played chess in the back room. A mother read to her toddler on a beanbag. A boy practiced his English beside a volunteer. It was a home for the unclaimed, the unseen, the silenced. It was everything Thomas Ray had believed the world should be. That evening, as the sun poured golden light through the windows, Olivia sat by the photo wall. She ran her fingers across one frame in particular, a faded image of her, Grace, and Mia standing beside Thomas, his eyes squinting in the sun, his hand resting protectively on Olivia's shoulder. No caption, no date, just memory carved in light. "I hope you see this," she whispered. And maybe somewhere he did. Because legacies don't live in monuments. They live in moments. In the trembling hand of a girl who accepts a sandwich for the first time without shame. In the laugh of a child whose bruises are finally fading. In the quiet dignity of a woman who remembers what it means to be saved, and now saves others. 26 years ago, Thomas Ray planted a seed without asking for anything in return. Today, the garden was blooming. It wasn't Christmas. There were no decorations, no music echoing from shop windows, no tree crowned with a star. But the moment felt like a holiday all the same, quiet, sacred, brimming with something more than celebration. Something deeper. Something earned. The girl Olivia had welcomed in weeks ago, her name was Eva, now sat at one of the center's worn wooden tables, chewing slowly on a grilled cheese sandwich. She still didn't talk much. But she no longer flinched at sudden movements. She slept through the night. She laughed, sometimes, when younger children played tag down the hallway and tumbled into each other like unsteady birds. And today, she was wearing a scarf. Purple. Bright. A gift from Mia. Olivia watched her from the kitchen, her hands steeped in dishwater, her heart full of something that didn't have a name. Pride? Gratitude? Maybe it was just the long ache of memory resolving into peace. She remembered what it was like to be Eva. Cold. Silent. Suspicious of anyone who offered warmth without condition. And she remembered what it felt like when someone, one man, had given her more than shelter. He had given her dignity. He had seen her when the world looked away. The front door creaked open. Grace stepped in, her coat dusted with snow, her arms full of files and court papers. She looked exhausted, like always, but also alive, vital. Behind her came 2 teens from the shelter program, arguing good-naturedly about chess moves. Mia arrived shortly after, wheeling in a box of donated books. The quiet of the center bloomed into motion, into warmth, into the unmistakable pulse of community. And then came the knock. It was soft, almost uncertain. Olivia opened the door to find an elderly man in a U.S. Postal Service uniform standing on the porch. His hair was white, his cap slightly askew, and his eyes carried the weight of long roads traveled. "You Olivia Ray?" he asked. "I am," she replied, brushing her hands on her apron. He handed her a small package, neatly wrapped, aged at the corners, with handwriting she hadn't seen in decades. Her breath caught. It was his. She tore it open with care, as if the paper might break into dust. Inside was a tin box, the kind soldiers used to carry tobacco or small keepsakes. It was dented, worn, but still intact. When she opened it, a folded letter lay on top. Beneath it, a tarnished dog tag and a photo of Thomas Ray in uniform, young, serious, unflinching. She opened the letter. "If you're reading this, kiddo, it means you did it. You made it. I knew you would. I kept this box because someday I wanted to remember who I was before the world made me bitter. But you made me better. You reminded me what it was to feel something without shame. This ain't money. It's not land or a name in some will. But it's everything I have. My service tag. My story. And this photo, proof I lived once and I saw something worth living for. Give it to the next one who needs to believe in people again. And when you do, tell them this. The greatest gift is not safety, not even survival. It's knowing someone saw you and still stayed. That's all I ever tried to be for you. Stay human, Olivia. Always."
TR.
Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry, not the way she used to. Not out of pain. This time, the tears came like spring rain on a parched field. Gentle, restorative. She pressed the dog tag to her chest and looked around. At the girl in the purple scarf. At Grace, laughing softly, with one of the boys. At Mia, coaxing a toddler into choosing a book. At the walls filled with art made by children once too afraid to pick up a crayon. Humanity. That's what he had left her. Not inheritance, not insurance, not a legacy built on stone. Just the courage to believe in people. To love without needing permission. To see the broken and stay anyway. She placed the tin on the mantel beneath the brass plaque and lit a single candle beside it. No ceremony. No words. But everyone in the room paused. They knew. Later that night, Eva approached Olivia while she was locking up. Her voice was soft, cracking but sure. "Miss Olivia, do you think someone like him would have seen me too?" Olivia didn't hesitate.
"He already did," she said.
"That's why you're here." And in that moment, everything Thomas Ray had ever been, everything he had ever done, not with weapons, not with medals, but with compassion, came full circle. Because the greatest gift isn't remembered in history books or etched in stone. It lives in hearts passed hand to hand, in kindness echoed across time, in one soul daring to see another and whisper, "I choose you anyway." That's the miracle of humanity. And it never dies.